Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the council meeting and the budget meeting. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Over to Mr Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Mike Day, Bev Hopkins, Sue and Sue Jones. Any others?
Councillor Hazel Morris.
Graham Thomas.
Councillor Les Walton.
She's joined, Councillor.
Oh, she's joined.
Yeah.
Okay, the next item is the disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. I'll hand you over to Tracy Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you, presiding member. I'm taking a number of block declarations of interest tonight, and I'll go through them in the order in which they appear on the agenda. In relation to agenda items 8 and 9, that's the medium-term financial plan and the revenue budget, I've asked you to look at particular items as to whether the decision affects your business or employment carried on by yourselves, any body to which you've been elected or appointed to by the authority or others, and whether any decision would affect your well-being or financial position or that of a close personal associate. So the first declaration that I will take is in relation to both agenda items, that's 8 and 9. If you are a member of the Port Health Authority, the Fire Authority, the National Waterfront Museum or the Wales National Pool, it's a personal interest only if you've been appointed by the authority. So can I ask that any members of those organisations either raise their virtual hands if attending online, or if in the chamber, raise your hands. Personal interest for both agenda items 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Okay, Hugh.
Okay.
And again, if I can remind you just to fill in the declaration sheet as well. The second block declaration I will take is that there are a number of amendments. One of those amendments relates to the CDC chairs. So can I ask the CD chairs to also raise their hands, either virtually if attending online or if attending in the chamber. Again, personal interest only, and that's in relation to agenda item 9. Okay. And then the third interest, block declaration for interest that I'll take. There are some social services budget savings in agenda item 9, particularly around adult social services in terms of reviewing fees and charges and increasing contributions. Now, I take the view that these are high level budget lines and therefore they are personal interests, particularly if they relate to yourselves or that of a close personal associate. So again, personal interest only in relation to agenda item 9. That will relate to whether or not you've got somebody that may be in receipt of care and that may be impacted by the high level line in the budget papers, or if indeed you're employed or you have a family member that's employed by the local authority. So again, block declaration, agenda item 9, personal interest only. Okay, and then final block declaration is in relation to agenda item 11, which is the capital budget and programme report. There are a number of schools mentioned in this report, so I'll take a block declaration, again, personal interest only, if you're a school governor appointed by the LEA. Yeah, can I just remind you to fill in the forms? Thank you.
Is it possible, the monitoring officer, is it possible that this seems to be a bit ridiculous? I think every member in this chamber is either a governor or has a relationship within a school. Surely there's a better way of doing it than this, because this carries on every day, every council meeting. People ask questions, and surely we should look at this in constitutional working group to see if there's a better way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, we can certainly look at that in constitutional working group. There is another way to deal with it, and I can take a report to constitutional working group. That aside, can I just ask, are there any other declarations of interest that members need to make?
Yeah, items 10 and 12. Housing revenue account, I'm a council tenant with a secure tenancy and proud of it.
And that's personal interest only.
Personal interest in 11 and amendment 9A.
Personal interest item 9.
Yeah, personal interest item 13, Clogau Town Councillor.
Okay, the next item is the minutes, and that's to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meetings as a correct record, and that's pages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, all in agreement? Yep. Item 4 is written responses to councils to questions asked at the last ordinary meeting of council, and that's on pages 7 and 8. Next is the announcements of the presiding member. Okay, I've only got one announcement, and that's the Gower College Swansea Apprenticeship Awards for 2023. I'd like to congratulate the Swansea Council employees and the council itself for success at the recent Gower College Swansea Apprenticeship Awards 2023. These awards are held annually to celebrate the many successful apprenticeship schemes run by the Gower College in Swansea. The awards recognise the achievements over the year of the apprentices, employers and college staff, and congratulations to Kieran Redden, Brick Lane Apprenticeship of the Year, Louise Rigby, Digital Application Support Apprentice of the Year, Christopher Davis, Leadership and Management Apprenticeship of the Year, Gemma Davis, Social Service Practitioner Apprentice of the Year, Yestin Thomas, Supporting Teaching and Learning Apprentice of the Year, and Swansea Council Apprentice Employer of the Year, 250 plus employees. Okay, thank you. The next item is the announcements of the leader.
Chair, no announcements for this session.
Okay, thank you. We move on to item 7 then, which is the public questions. And can I call on Suzanne Jeffries, please?
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to ask the question this evening. We recently visited the other areas referred to by Councillor Robert Francis Davis in the last meeting, and they cannot be compared to what the community has lost in Manalaeth. Whilst Manalaeth has some incidental pockets of green space within the village and scrubland on the outskirts, neither area is acceptable as mitigation for the exclusion of the non-football playing public from the playing fields. Would the council accept that they may have been misguided in suggesting these areas as safe and free from inappropriate hazards as seen in the guidelines from Planning Policy Wales, as they are unsuitable spaces for children to access independently due to the distance from their home, the increased traffic density and the lack of quality free play opportunities?
RFD.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries, for your question. Policies contained in Planning Policy Wales are only material consideration for the local planning authority in the determination of planning applications and for the preparation of the local development plan. Now, concerning the wider community's needs for informal recreation space for activities such as walking, exercise and play, alternative spaces do exist within walking distance. Victoria Road, which has recently undergone a significant upgrade to the play equipment, along with many others in the city and county of Swansea, adjoins open land to the rear on a slight incline, but which then further adjoins to more level land off Caiginnith Road. Specifically, the play area at Victoria Road is a designated playground with suitable facilities and equipment which are regularly inspected and maintained for the community to enjoy recreation and play. Now, to suggest that this area is not safe or hazardous is disputed by the council, given the investments and regime in place. The decision as whether this area is accessed independently by children and young people is subject to a number of considerations which only parents or carers or guardians can determine based ultimately on the age of the child. In closer proximity to the land at Roseland Road and accessible via Conclade or Astrid Road is the open land of the B4295 Swansea Road / Cumbach Road, and open land directly off Cumclade. Larger areas known as the Graig and the Mynydd Glow, in other words, the Common, are also accessible and well used for walking and general recreation. This is a statement of fact based upon assessment of which is currently available locally, and I refute that there has been any misguiding to inform our decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call on Brian Fox for the next question, please. I believe you're online, Brian.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for giving me the time to pose this question. For many, many years, we've held some really spectacularly successful events in Singleton Park. These are cross-country events, and they cross-country and cyclocross, I should say. But recently, over the past few years, we have not been able to get a guarantee that the event could go ahead. This is even though we've applied through the special events department, who we've always had a brilliant working relationship with. However, the Parks Department retain the right to cancel the event at any time up to the event. It's a bit of a problem for race organisers like myself when we're trying to organise events well in advance. I mean, sometimes 12 months in advance, that we cannot get a guarantee that the event will go ahead. The nature of cross-country and cyclocross running is that we're able to run in very muddy and very wet conditions. The amount of damage that is done to the park is minimal, and I always carry out an inspection after the event, even a week after the event, to make sure that there's no damage to the park, and also any discussions that the parks authorities will want to have with us. So what we're looking for is if in the future that we can get a guarantee from the Parks Department that we can go ahead with some of these, and some of them are international events as well. Talking to the CEO of Welsh Athletics last Saturday in the Welsh Championships in Brecon, he was talking about putting a bid in for the European cross-country championships in the future. Now, you know, I'd like to think that Swansea, because we're a brilliant venue, I think we should be putting a bid forward for that event. It would bring a lot of money and a lot of kudos to the city. I've seen it in the past with lots of other athletes coming to Swansea of all ages, and we cater for athletes from 11 to 70 odd years of age, and they're so impressed with Swansea and the surrounding area that they come back. So it's hugely important that we promote the city and sport for all as well. It's a healthy way of life that we're promoting. So many thanks for your consideration of this question.
RFD.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. This follows on really from the question that has come in from Councillor Jeff Jones, Mary Jones, and I think it's Graham Thomas as well. There's nothing really much I can add further to what I've answered in that question. But what I would say, it isn't a recent change. We have always reserved the right to cancel events in the event of extreme weather. Now, we've checked with Cardiff councils, Bute Park, for instance, their cancellation clauses are very, very similar to Swansea's. And they use Bute Park in a similar way to that we use Singleton Park. The two events that have been cancelled or postponed have taken place in either October or November, which over the last few years have been unusually wet. And in fact, we've had complaints from councillors that some of the areas within the park after other events, and I'm not talking about the cross country now, have left the park in a bit of a state. All right, it's a lot of reinstatement gets carried out. But cancellation does remain the last resort. And we always work with organisers to find alternative sites or routes or dates wherever possible. So there hasn't been a lot of cancellations. Unfortunately, it does happen. Do we want to see more events like and the championship that you talked about? Yes, you know, we would like to see these coming here. I think our track record, excuse the pun, is very good. I think when it comes to sport, you know, we're in our 42nd year of the Swansea Bay 10K. Well, we got the Ironman coming, you know, which was great success, and for next year or this year coming, sold out within a week. In fact, it was less than a week. When we look at the triathlons that take place, the 5K also, there's a lot of athletic events that take place, you know, and I would congratulate the work of Swansea Harriers that we have worked with very closely over the years. At Ashley Road at the university, then up at them over and back down to the university again. We are very keen to work with athletics, get big championships here. I'm more than happy to talk to you in the future of how we can work together. But I can assure you, cancellation is a last resort to maintain the park that people want to see. So it is with reluctance that they had to be cancelled.
Thank you,
Yep. Can I respond just by saying that, yes, I agree entirely. Swansea punches well above its weight when it comes to putting on sporting events. The city is renowned for it, in fact, and we would just like to see this extended to the winter period. I know winter is wet, and we know the conditions. However, you know, it is a minimal damage that's done to the park. We have had several instances of cancellation in 2020 and earlier in 2022. There were 3 instances of cancellation of the event, and we would accept that if in the event of bad weather that we would accept that there's a cancellation, but we would still like to be able to get a better assurance, let me say, whichever way that could work, from the authorities to go ahead with long-term planning of events. Let's bring sport and success back to Swansea as we've always done in the past. And it's not just, I also work with Welsh Cycling, by the way, not just the Swansea Harriers. So I'm speaking not in a personal capacity, not necessarily as a member. I've been a member of Harriers for 40 years. So many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cox.
I'm more than happy, give the assurance, we're happy to meet at any time to discuss, you know, the future of athletics in Swansea.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you for that response.
Thank you. I'd like to call Mr. Alex Threaves, please.
My name's Alex Threaves. I'm a member of the Socialist Party, and I'm speaking on behalf of Trace Council on item 9 of the revenue budget. I just want to say, in putting this into context, since the condemned government came into power in 2010, we've had 13 years of austerity. Swansea Council have cut £100 million. We were expected to cut £25 million again this year, and projected to cut another 50 million over the next 3 years. So this is not new for us. we've been lobbying the council for the last 13 years. I got nowhere except more and more cuts. And the question I want to put to the Labour group, really, the controlling group on Swansea Council, is why hasn't Swansea Council considered as a one-off measure the tactic of implementing a legal no-cuts budget, which is supported, by the way, by the Wales TUC, by Unite the Union, by Unison, by the local government trade unions as well, in order to prevent another £25 million being cut this financial year, and as I said, another 50 million in the next period. Now, I spoke at the Cabinet a few weeks ago, and the leader of the council said no one's really explained to him what a legal no-cuts budget is. Well, I've tried for the last 13 years to explain to this council what a legal no-cuts budget is, and to legally balance, what we say is we should use current reserves and prudential borrowing powers to legally balance the books, was initiating a campaign amongst other Labour-employed councils in Wales, alongside local government trade unions, community campaigners, and a Welsh-led Labour government to demand adequate funding from this weak, divided Tory government to meet the needs of the residents. So we're saying it's not medium term, it's not short term, it's a one-off campaign initiated by this council in order to prevent the disaster that we are seeing with cuts. The alternative is continuing the policy of there's nothing we can do, and we get that every year. There's nothing we can do. The Welsh government will give us money because it comes from Westminster, and the Westminster government won't do it. Well, we've got to do something. There's something more than there's nothing we can do. Otherwise, local government is going to be destroyed. Our services will be destroyed, and working class people will see their lives destroyed in Swansea. When do you draw the line? When are you going to do something about these cuts instead of saying there's nothing we can do?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Threaves. You did ask the same question at Cabinet, and I'll give you roughly the same answer, but I'll add a bit more to it. So in terms of your request, so why can't you use your reserves and your prudential borrowing powers? So the first part, yes, absolutely. And we are deploying significant reserves this year, around £30 million. We deployed £30 million as well last year. So over a 2-year period, we've deployed £60 million worth of reserves.
Amazing that, because
it's not a debate.
You told me
Mr. Threaves.
Excuse me, it's a debate across the chamber.
I sat quietly and listened to your question. I would ask you to do the same to my answer. So, Mr. Threaves, the £60 million worth of reserves are being deployed. That is more than has been deployed over a 10-year period. So there is a significant amount of reserves going in. I'll ask Mr. Smith to confirm what I'm saying is right next, but we cannot borrow to support services. It is unlawful to do so. And were we to attempt to do that, Mr. Smith would intervene and prevent it. So you cannot borrow for services. As I've tried to explain previously, you can only borrow for capital projects. You cannot support services with borrowing. It is unlawful. Secondly, if you were able, let's say, for instance, we could stop the auditors getting on the train and coming down and visiting us. You could tie Mr. Smith up and put him in a cupboard with a bag over his head and tape over his mouth and hope that he wasn't going to intervene. You then were going to deploy maybe 150 million pounds worth of reserves in 1 year. In order to do that, all you're doing is deferring the pressure to the following year. And when that following year comes, you have then built yourself an enormous problem where the council would be heading towards bankruptcy. You would then see the auditors and others stepping in, taking control of the council. But worse than that, Mr. Threaves, the people that we've been working for many years to protect their jobs, to invest in services, there would be significant adjustments to the budget in that year, probably a reduction down to only statutory services and hundreds of people losing their jobs as a result. I don't want to see that. As I've said, what you're asking for is not lawful. It would be horrendous, even if it was attempted. I'm here to protect jobs, as is the Labour administration. I'm here to invest in services, as is the Labour administration. That's what we'll continue to do. And I would say, Mr. Threaves, you had this answer at the Cabinet. I was very polite to you at Cabinet. I did try and explain the technicalities at Cabinet about why the answer is the answer. But, you know, if you want to continue to ask the same question, you're going to continue to get the same answer.
See, I said £25 million worth of cuts this year. You could borrow £25 million worth of cuts. You told me in the past. You told me in the past that you couldn't use reserves. Now you're saying you have used reserves. Use 25 million.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I may respond, because the other part that Mr. Thraves again missed at Cabinet, but I will repeat now. There is net £50 million going into the budget. That is £35 million of additional money after you account for any reductions or cuts. So there's £35 million extra going in on top of the base budget. And in addition to that, we've announced a £15 million energy fund. So the net increase in the budget this year is £50 million, not a cut.
£25 million worth of cuts.
Next is a call on Mr. Dave Warren, please.
Here we are, double-barreled assault today, Rob. I'm also speaking on behalf of Swansea Trades Council, which is a trade union body. There are thousands of low-paid trade unionists in Swansea. And my question relates to the proposed council tax increase, which I understand is 5.95%. Admittedly, that's below inflation, but it's above the pay rise, which a lot of workers in Swansea are going to get this year. Civil servants, of which there are thousands in the Swansea area, have been offered 2% this year. So a council tax increase of that magnitude is only going to add to the horrendous cost of living crisis, which is phasing working people in Swansea. As my colleague there said, we've had 13 years of Tory cuts. They've been implemented by a Labour-led government in Cardiff Bay and also by Labour councils, including here in Swansea. And that's led to services being cut. It's led to council jobs being lost. And that's gone on alongside continually rising council tax. So I'd like you to try and justify council tax rise of that magnitude this year and explain why Labour Council in Swansea is asking Swansea residents to pay for the price of Tory mismanagement and greed. I'd like to just add on a technical issue, by the way, Rob, that councils can't go bankrupt. Councils are not businesses, so technically they can't go bankrupt. I think you need to talk to Mr. Smith and bone up on the technicalities.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. It's good to see you. I do sympathise greatly with what Mr. Warren said about public sector pay, and I know our position has been that we want UK government to provide people with inflation level pay rises at least, so that people don't get hit by the cost of living crisis. And Mr. Warren will know that the job I believe he still does now at DVLA, if he's still there, he's moved on, was the job that I did previously, and I was very grateful and very pleased to be able to introduce a whole fairer pay system in DVLA, which we negotiated at the time, which still persists to the day and protects some of the DVLA workers from some of the excesses of the Conservative government. But on the point you make, it's interesting. I don't know whether you and Mr. Thraves talk, because it seems to be you're following a bit of la-la land politics and finances here, because Mr. Thraves has just asked us to spend lots more and borrow lots more, and you've asked us to stop raising money. So you want to stop pulling the money in that goes to fund services, and Mr. Thraves wants us to spend more of those services. As I've said before, we're politicians, not magicians, and we can't just magic money up. But on the rise itself, just to put it into context, we are proposing from this council a 3.95% council tax. It is a total of 5.95% because of the decisions made by the Fire Authority. They implemented a 17% rise this year, and that bill Unlike the police, where they raise a separate precept, that bill falls directly to this authority to fund. We have no direct control over it. That is a decision made by the Fire Authority. That means that we are picking up net £2.2 million worth of costs this year, equivalent of 2% on council tax. So in terms of the 3.95% we are raising, that will raise us just around £4 million of a £700 million budget. That's the difference the council tax increase makes. And if you were to equate it, for instance, to a Band B property, because most of our properties, if you look at them, are Band A, B, C, a Band B property, it equates to 86 pence a week increase in terms of the increase that we're asking people to pay. I would also say that yes, there will be lots of public sector workers and others being offered below inflation pay rises. As a council, we are part of a national pay offer. We don't negotiate pay locally ourselves, but we absolutely support the principle of, as I said, of an inflation pay rise. And again, if the unions that we have productive and very good relationships with, if their members decide to accept the pay award that's currently on the table, then the pay awards for the majority of the staff up to 0.43 will be significantly above the level that you've mentioned there. I would also say, of course, because inflation is at 10% at the moment, and if we go ahead with the rise here of 3.95%, then that will mean that a real terms cut in the council tax level of 6%. That takes £6 million out of our budget this year against inflation and actually costs the council close to 24 million between now and the next election. That's the reality of what inflation versus council tax means to the services in this council. So again, Mr. Warren, I absolutely understand where you're coming from, but you can't have the sort of economics that you're suggesting where you spend more, borrow unlawfully, and then don't raise any money through council tax. It's not possible for this council. And we would go bankrupt. We would certainly run out of money, and there would be intervention, as there has been to a number of councils in England.
Can I call on Ms Ben Smith, please?
Thank you, presiding member. And this is in relation to the leader asking to call me in to comment on some of the matters that have been raised. And for the avoidance of doubt, whilst bankruptcy is used as an indicator, the questioners are quite right. We can't technically go bankrupt, but for the avoidance of doubt, as the leader has indicated, there are very, very strict rules. So a local authority may not borrow for a revenue purpose. Any attempt to borrow for a revenue purpose would result in my issuing an immediate Section 114 notice, effectively declaring it an unlawful act and an unlawfully balanced budget, and the consequences would be horrific, as the leader has indicated in a number of other authorities where effectively all control is taken away from the council. You would expect me to act first before the auditors acted in the public interest or before commissioners were brought in, so that there are very real reasons why the options that members have are very, very limited on that technical matter of the phrase bankruptcy and what the consequences would be. As the leader has indicated, and I will be updating as I give advice, there are substantial draws from reserves. Yes, reserves in isolation can be drawn for 1 year, but you will see in my technical advice there are very material draws from reserves proposed. And the leader is quite right, there would be a cliff edge effect in the future. And in terms of pay awards and other matters, I will again be updating in due course. It's not for me to comment on the politics of it, but for the avoidance of doubt, the local government employers have offered a flat rate £1,925, which is equivalent to an average of 7% for local government workers for the coming year, effectively replicating last year's pay offer. And that is one of the big drivers of our budget. Whilst the teachers' pay awards are negotiated at all Wales level and not resolved, it is at the moment, and a minimum of 5% already implemented by Welsh Government in the current year, an offer of an additional 3% half and half between base and rolled over, and a commitment to reopen next year's pay award. So the pay pressures we face, as well as a number of the inflation pressures we face, mean that our spending power is undoubtedly eroded, even with 7 to 8% increases in grant support. And there is a reason why most authorities in Wales end up going for broadly similar ranges of council tax increases, and why in England, where different rules apply around capping arrangements before you have to go to a local referendum, frankly, just about any authority that's got social care responsibility is effectively forced to go with 5%. The reality is all authorities are heavily geared in terms of their spending, and so therefore Once the determinant has been made about overall public sector funding, there are very limited options at the margin. And I'm afraid, as the leader indicated in the response back to Cabinet, my job is to sit in the background and make sure you do things that are lawful and balanced and give advice. This authority listens to my advice, doesn't have to always follow it, but there would be consequences if they didn't choose to follow advice that I believe to otherwise result in the council acting contrary to law. And I would not be shy at issuing those arrangements, but I do not want to ever be placed in that position. I want all councillors in this council to be able to make their own local choices, not to have choices imposed upon them if any of the horrible escalation measures were implemented. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, we're moving on then to the next item, and that's the medium-term financial planning for 24, 25, 26, 27. And I'd like to call on Mr. Ben Smith, the 151 officer, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Member. And as is the normal fashion, I will give an opening technical set of advice on all reports as a whole, but will then come back as quickly and rapidly as I can on the individual items. They do say politics can be brutal. Well, I'm afraid budgets can also be brutal for Section 151 officers in local government. I don't relish having to remind that I have statutory duties if members won't make local choices to comply with the fiscal rules that we face. Every year I turn up and say it's the hardest ever cycle, and I'm afraid so it is again. I'm now in my 32nd year of doing this, and like some aged prize fighter, relying on muscle memory, trying to duck and dive the now economic and financial blows and woes that are about. It's not so much Raging Bull as Raging Ben, but there are reasons why I have to give very stern advice to the administration, to all councillors at times. I don't like it. I do have a heart, I promise, but my head sometimes has to ensure that the law is complied with. It is a personal fiduciary duty upon myself. Adding to that sense of deja vu about here we go again, we have very high nominal numbers included in the budget and in our funding and settlement. But in real terms, be under no illusions, spending power is falling, and there simply is not enough cake mix to go around to address all the pressures that we face in this council, as every council and across the public sector, let alone getting into the policy decisions of how to make, bake, and then slice the cake. I only simply have to make sure that the numbers add up. You've got the hard job to do, and another hard job again today, and harder jobs to come in the future. And I do recognise the points that Mr. Thraves and others have made, but you've got to continue both to make decisions now and have an eye to the future. You have an obligation under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act to do so. Given we have an agenda that's clearly been designed to test the strength of an Olympic weightlifter and the stamina of a marathon runner, I will only focus on some of the core areas of novelty in the papers. Those of you that are long serving in the chamber will recognise a common theme and format to most of the papers, and I will speak on some of the interesting and odd ones in isolation. But for the avoidance of doubt, for the big ticket stuff, the medium-term financial plan, my best assumptions based on what I know and what I don't know, but also a novel device to defer £50 million worth of borrowing and to deploy reserves in the meantime to simply avoid borrowing at rates that are now 10 times increased from when I borrowed historically at all-time low rates. So there is £50 million worth of reserves being deployed there to support capital spending over the medium term. In revenue, there is a major device designed around energy inflation to park it in the railway siding and only fund from one-off reserves. That has been done deliberately because the law requires you to balance the budget each year. And if it was in base budget, I would have required you to make base budget savings today, tonight, to ensure that the budget balanced. I will come back to energy matters in a moment as an example of some of the pressures we face when questions are asked around why do you have to do this. Pay and prices are not at all clear. Pay inflation, I have a degree of certainty over the local government pay award. I guessed lucky in a budgeted with papers that exactly matches the employer's national full and final offer, but there has not yet been a response from the trade unions. Teachers' pay, as I've already indicated, is much more muddied and not in our control. I don't know this year's pay award, let alone 23-24's pay award, and I'm not quite sure how it's all going to be funded. I'm looking to all parties involved to honour all words and commitments made about ensuring that no one is left carrying a very expensive cost when the pass the parcel ends. And in the capital programme, you'll see it starts to diminish in terms of spending nominal power over future years. And that is a device as a result of not building in that £50 million, which is referenced in both revenue and the MTFP, around there will be future decisions to come to before Cabinet via an FPR7 report process of adding things into the capital programme in due course. The rest of the reports have nothing novel or contentious in them. I will only speak briefly to them to give you guidance and advice because I recognise they are complicated. I will, however, in this update at the start, make particular reference to drawing your attention to some good news that I'll draw out, especially in the Treasury Management Strategy that I'm pleased to announce tonight. So overall, it's another year of good nominal increases, but very, very challenging real terms when you factor in inflation and the risks we have. You have hard choices. There is no doubt about it. I recognise the leader's £60 million going in. I recognise Mr. Thrave's £25 million coming out. I recognise £35 million net going in, and all of the other matters. That's purely on the general fund. But be under no doubt, the proposals here, you have a fairly flexible Section 151 officer. He is signing off as adequate these reports on the basis that £30 million is being drawn from reserves in 22-23. £30 million up to is being drawn in 23-24 to support the revenue budgets, and up to £50 million temporarily from capital to support capital items in the medium-term financial plan. So yes, we have £160 million in earmarked reserves, and it sounds a lot. And yes, the roof does need mending, so we are going to be deploying them. But you've got 30 and 30 and 50. That's 110 million of those £160 million earmarked reserves potentially in play and being deployed to buy as much time as possible for the overall rounded package of the revenue, capital and medium-term financial plan. So I have no doubt that I could go no further, and therefore that's the advice I've given today in all of the reports. I did say I would come back to energy as an example. Read across between personal budgets and council budgets is never ideal, but bear with me. If you're a household, and when I give this example, I'm not commenting on the politics or the policy, just the cold, hard facts as I see them. If you're a household, you used to have an energy bill of around £1,000 if you were a typical household. It's gone up to £2,500, but with 400 quid cash back from the government. But to avoid making it complicated, let's just say it went to £2,000 rather than £2,100. And if anyone follows Money Saving Expert and various other websites, you'll be aware that that is meant to go up to £3,000 come the 1st of April. So pause and think about that. The bill has gone from £1,000 to £2,000 to £3,000. Now, depending on your choice of national daily newspaper, either shock headline, government achieves aim of halving inflation, because inflation goes from 100% to 50% as measured arithmetically by the ONS. And that is an arithmetical certainty. Inflation will drop. There isn't an economist or accountant who doesn't think it will. It's how sticky it proves, and it's what sort of inflation. It's all very well having a measured headline of inflation that drops, but it's not very good if the price of all your food is up 15% and the cost of your energy is up hundreds of percent. If you have a different daily newspaper, it might be in another hammer household blow, bills go up another 50%. And the problem is that this is all at a time when wages, if you're lucky, are 5%. I do accept the question earlier. Some people are facing 2%. And yes, pensioners and those on benefits might be getting 10%, but 10% of not very much doesn't go very far on a £3,000 combined energy bill. So I use that as an example because we all see it. All residents will see it in their own lives. And of course, there is a desire to avoid a further compounding of a cost of living crisis. But if I just now step back and look at the council, it's not a household. It's got different pressures, but it's also got some similar pressures. This year, we've avoided almost all of the energy cost increases. We buy all of our energy in advance. So our gas and electricity prices went up 7 or 17%. For 23-24, I'm facing my nightmare year of costs. We've now bought over 90% of our energy. And the good news is our energy bill won't go from 7 million to 22 million, a £15 million increase. It may only go up by 12 million. Whoopee-doo, but that's still £12 million of core spending power eroded. And let me be clear, if you look at the potential for last year's catch-up pay award, the pay award for this coming year, and those energy costs, our spending power hasn't got anywhere else to go. There isn't enough in council tax and block grant to cover anything else. So, the reality is we haven't got those many choices. And for the avoidance of doubt, whilst it's useful to have a couple of energy schemes nationally that cap wholesale prices, Every single penny of energy that we bought this year and next year, we've benefited from not one penny of that guarantee, because we must be doing something right. In the same way we guessed right on interest rates, we guessed right on inflation rates for pay awards likely to come, we seem to have guessed right on our buying strategy for energy. So when you take a step back and look at a grant increase of about 7 to 8%, yes, council tax is in a range of 5 to 6%, and it will discomfort all 75 members. It will. I do get it. But that is about, when you take into account how weighted things are, about 7% spend power. Well, we've got a pay bill that's going to go up at least 7%, an energy bill that's going to go up 175%. So there is a cost of living crisis in this council, as there is in every council, and it is a reason why all councils in Wales tend to broadly coalesce around a very similar range of figures. Some may go lower, I suspect, because they'll be drawing reserves. Some will be going higher because they make policy choices over the balance of cuts or investment, or the amount between capital and revenue. So it is really, really difficult. And I'll end with my infamous but slightly more polite phrase when I was asked by officials around some of the cost pressures we face. Could I exemplify them? And unfortunately, the phrase used was chicken and egg. Well, I'm afraid my language was not the politest, but we are in a public meeting, so I will behave myself. I said, when the cost of chicken is up 15%, you can't get any eggs off the shelf. The cost of energy has trebled, and the cost of the pay to the staff cooking it has gone up 10%. Anecdotally, I can assure you I could do with more than a 7% grant increase. I am known for being a bit of a bruiser, but say it for personal effect, and I think it does help to give that example. It's not entirely analogous, but that's a flavour of why we have pressures. And you are going to hear the same in every council up and down the land, every public body up and down the land. I just choose to say it slightly earthier. So I hope you find the technical advice on the whole useful, and I do promise I will be then much briefer on the individual reports in due course. Thank you, presiding member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'd now like to call on the councillors to ask any technical questions of the 151 officer, and just to remind you, there will be an opportunity to ask specific questions under each item. So are there any questions, specific questions for Mr. Councillor Jones?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Smith, for the work you've actually done on this, once again. It's just a question about reserves and, clarification. We've had good settlements, I think, over the last 3 years, and managed to increase reserves up to, I think you said a figure, 160 million. And I think this year we managed to, again, put another 8 million into the capital equalisation reserve. So I'm assuming we've actually got, in essence, 108 million left now. Now, they're actually called usable reserves. But, is there a safe limit where those reserves can actually go down to? I know they class them as usable, but some of them, I assume, were actually logged against perhaps insurance and so on. So what sort of figure would we go down to as a safe minus from the reserve figure?
So if I can come in, presiding member, as ever, a very good, sound question, Councillor Jones. Yes, the 8 million that is referenced in terms of being added to the capital equalisation reserve, I'm not going to count my chickens yet. It's not there. It's expected come the end of this year. I'm going to give technical advice on the individual reports, proposing to put 8 in, but the MTFP is proposing to take 6 of that straight back out again for the device for the capital financing. So I'm still sticking at the 160 million for now. I've referenced I expect 30 to be drawn plus 30, and I'm going to be deploying £50 million worth of usable reserves to temporarily fund the capital programme for the life of the MTFP. That's 110 million. That reduces us to 50 million. You are quite right, Councillor Jones. Many of these things are earmarked for very specific purposes. That includes the schools reserves. I wouldn't make myself popular if I went and helped myself to the schools reserves. I'm sure schools would prefer to spend their own reserves. Obviously, they'd all prefer to conserve the reserves, but it includes schools reserves. So don't bank too much on going below 50 million there. 15 million, 16 million is insurance reserves. And don't forget, we self-insure our entire housing stock. So if something awful did happen and there was a substantial cost to us, the insurance reserve would be used for that. So my view is, it's always dangerous to draw an absolute line in the sand. It's better to always have some wiggle room. But the reason I've given the advice on the limits for the 2 lots of revenue draws, plus the amount I've said I'm prepared to sign off as indicative for the medium-term financial plan for temporary use of reserves to support the capital programme, that would get me to £50 million of usable reserves still available. Some are schools, some are insurance, and you would be very, very unlikely to hear this Section 151 officer signing off a lower number than that. So there is method in the madness in all the advice I've given. I do genuinely believe I have stretched as far as is reasonably practical in the circumstances. It does mean that that deployment of the extra capital is the one that's novel. The revenue draws for the 2 years of £60 million, perfectly logical, because you're quite right. We've added £100 million to reserves over the last 3 years. But for the avoidance of doubt across the council chamber, I am at the limit of what I am likely to be able to sign off. And don't forget, that is my signing off personally, that I am protecting local taxpayers and declaring those reserves adequate. Authorities that tend to ignore Section 151 officer advice and believe that they can go below what is ruled adequate and effective end up in that horrible escalator we've already referred to of being in Section 114 territory, and ultimately intervention and effectively local democracy removed from the equation. And so very good question, but I think you should be able to work out that without quoting an absolute number that might come back to haunt me, I've already decided my officer advice at the moment. Of course, things may change over the years. The MTFP is an assumption over estimates for 3-4 years ahead, but I've drawn my firm red lines down when in the report. I'll stop there. I will slow down. Whoever's asked me to slow down. I'm obviously had far too much caffeine already today because I'm anticipating trying to get through 1,000 pages of paper. So apologies. I will slow down.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Any more questions from the councillors? Technical questions? No? Can I call on present the budget, please? No, that's what I got here.
Yeah. We need to vote on the MTFP first.
No,
we're doing the budget presentation.
Okay, sorry, I'm having conflicting information yet. That's okay, Councillor Stewart.
Now, would I have photos? For those new members, some people do tend to pop up in my budget presentation from time to time. So I wanted to start by setting the landscape of what the budget is in. So I just thought, what's going on around us, because it is important. The whole of the budget, this covers all of the budget papers, yeah, everything. So just to say, cost of living crisis, higher mortgage costs, energy crisis, unfunded pay deals, market turmoil, below inflation settlement, rampant inflation and low growth, all playing a part in what we have. And of course, one of the architects of the recent piece of turmoil, Liz herself, and we couldn't have Liz without the lettuce, who obviously lasted longer than she did. Although you can't get a lettuce in some supermarkets these days, so we can't even run that one. So on to the help. And again, you've got some big challenges in there, because we've got below inflation settlement for Wales. So the Conservative government, I think, gave the Welsh government about 7% against 11% cuts. Obviously, as was referenced by Mr. Smith in the response, we don't negotiate the pay awards. They're done nationally, both in Cardiff and in London. But if they don't get funded by the government, then we get handed the bill. Without the money to do it, and that's not where we want to be. And of course, we have zero energy help as well. And what did the Tories give us? Well, as Mr. Smith said, not even a turnip we got out of the Tories. And up there, it's not Baldrick. That's Theresa Coffey. That's Baldrick, and as you'll remember him with his turnip interests. Pressures. As we said, in terms of the pressures we were facing, Mr. Smith referenced them there. We've got energy pressures, pay and levies, and we've got inflation. And those are significant because they amount, when you add them up, to potentially £61 million for us to find before we start. Now, Welsh Government originally offered us 3.5%. That was their original settlement. That was increased in the final settlement, giving us a further £14 million. As I said, we've used reserves, the Economic Recovery Fund, as it was going to be, for this year to draw £15 million for reserves. And as Mr. Smith referenced, had we have not had that £15 million to draw on, then that would have been a direct pressure on services and would have meant further £15 million worth of cuts needing to be made. Through the work that the pension fund have done, and again, congratulations to the pension fund colleagues, we are now over provisioned in our pension fund and therefore can return to a nominal level of contributions, which means that we provide a £5 million saving. As Mr Thraves and others referenced, there are austerity savings still to be realised as a result of the budgets. And obviously, we're proposing to deploy quite significant reserves and to raise income. And again, try to put it into context. Council tax is a very small element of what we raise because it doesn't give us, as I said, much money into the overall mix. So that's where you've got the pressures down one side and you've got how we're trying to resolve them on the other. So in terms of how we're responding, so as I said, £50 million going in net. That's over and above any savings that we're having to make. 35 million direct into services plus a £15 million energy fund. And that energy fund will be there for schools to draw on, for care homes to draw on, and for places like leisure centres to draw on, because we know they've been disproportionately hit with energy costs. And we don't want to be in a position like Powys, where we're closing or mothballing leisure centres and other facilities during the year. So breaking it down, in terms of schools and education, it's a record settlement in terms of overall money going in this year. £214 million, £12.4 million uplift, and a £6 million share of that energy fund to assist with our schools. And as Mr Smith said, he said it politely, I'll say it a bit more bluntly, the Tories wrote us out of having any help. Specifically, when they published the Green Book, public sector were written out of any help from the energy fund. That meant no help for schools, no help for care homes, no help for leisure centres. They then wrote back on that a few chancellors ago, or one of the chancellors wrote back on it anyway. And then they changed the rules, put us back in. But as Mr Smith said, because of the cap and because of the way they've arranged it, we still get no help. So no help before, no help now. On to care services, a record again. Investment for Swansea, 157 million, and 11.6 million pounds increase, £3 million, a share of £3 million of energy help available to them as well. I also wanted to reference the Shared Prosperity Fund. These are the funds that replace the EU funds that we used to get. They are down on what we would get because, again, our colleagues in London, the Tory government changed the criteria and the calculation of removing need as one of the comparators. And that meant that money moved away from areas like Swansea into other areas of the country. But still very pleased that we're getting 40 million. Unfortunately, because they haven't had a clue about how to do this, we're getting the money late and we've got to spend it by next December. And you can see there's some big pots of money. Councillor colleagues, cabinet colleagues will be getting those sums of money out the door. And I want to pay tribute to Paul, Ralph and Elliot at this point in time for pulling together the rules around the Shared Prosperity Fund and the mechanisms that we will use in this area. That's it in Welsh, so I comply with our requirements. On to a comparison. So I just wanted to check, that was our investment. Welcome, Stuart. Welcome back, I should say, Stuart. In terms of our significant investment that's going in, I know there are a couple of amendments that we're going to listen to shortly, but I just wanted to compare what we're doing with what happened before. And I was looking back and I stumbled upon the budget book from 2010. And lo and behold, what do we find? Well, actually, there's quite a lot of information up there. So I'll bring the rest up first. No, I can't read it. I tell you what, we need to have somebody who's really good at pointing at stuff, probably delivered by the Labour administration, but somebody who's really good at pointing. Who could we have? Yeah, let's have Peter, because Peter Pointer's there. He can help us in terms of pointing out some of the good stuff. So, Pete. I think there's too many Peter Mays up there for anybody. But no, if you look really closely, you will see that the Liberal Democrat Independent Administration and Stuart Rice, as the Lib Dem cabinet member at the time for finance, chose to not only close a library, the last library to close in Swansea, Bryn Mill Library, in the Uplands, no doubt, where you now represent. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, 4 of you. And also increased and introduced parking charges, which I think Councillor Holly submitted an amendment on today for us. But I also, because I dug a little bit deeper, there's a photo and an artist who did a story on the closure of Bryn Mill Library, and she did an interview with a local resident. And if you look at the text at the bottom there, it says the council had starved our library of its funds, and they said it was tatty and should go. Very informed individual. Do you know who that individual was? Councillor Irene Mann, just before she became an Uplands Party candidate. So I think she had a finger on the pulse even then. On the other side, having worked with Councillor Robert Smith, who's doing a fantastic job, along with Helen Morgan-Rees and the officers in education, I just thought I'd dig out the school budget forum response to the Liberal Democrat independent budget, and I don't think I've seen such a scathing letter ever. The teachers lay out there the fact that the Liberal Democrat administration had moved money provided by the Welsh Labour government from education into children's services, depriving schools of the money that was made available by the government. And of course, Councillor Holly, whose response is there, pointed out by number 9, Peter May, says, I'm afraid schools are just going to have to suck it up, I think is what he says. But, you know, just comparisons, what we're delivering today with what was delivered a few years ago. Going on to the capital budget, again, significantly large budget. This excludes the capital budget for HRA, which I'll come to separately. But this, again, is relatively one of the biggest, if not the biggest, capital investment budgets across Wales. Obviously, Cardiff will be numerically bigger because they're twice the size as a council. In terms of what it'll deliver this year, so again, Councillor Andrew Stevens and Councillor Cyril Anderson have lobbied hard, and we were able to make over 7 million around available this year for road repairs. We'll continue with our 48-hour pothole pledge. We will be launching the repairs programme as well as the patch programme, and members will already be getting more patch work done in their wards because we've uplifted the amount of time each ward gets for road repairs. Moving on to the homes programme, as I said, it's a significantly large programme again this year. Significantly larger than most in Wales. We have the largest housing stock, as you know, 51 million's going in this year, and a commitment of 270 million to go in over the next 4 years, all of course paid for by council tenants through their rents. It is a ring-fenced fund. And also pay tribute to Councillor Andrew Lewis for having the foresight to move very quickly to establish a dedicated team to proactively seek out any issues with damp or mould, so that we can get those sorted as quickly as possible, so that people are not worrying and we can respond really quickly. And just to say, in terms of the images there, they are the new houses we've just built down in West Cross. I'm sure Councillor Lewis will say a bit more about that later on. So let's compare that then to what used to happen when Councillor Peter May was a housing cabinet member. And of course, he was a Lib Dem, and there he is with Nick entertaining him in Swansea. And let's get him to point to something again, shall we? Well, here's one, and commend Councillor David Phillips and Councillor Sybil Crouch for the work that they did around the HMO policy. And of course, this graph, it is actually accurate for the Lib Dem councillors sitting on the benches. They won't have seen a graph like this on any of their leaflets, but it is an accurate graph. But what it does show is you've got a 400% growth in HMOs in the Uplands between 2007 and 2012, when Councillor Peter May was apparently dealing with this problem. And then when Labour come to power, as you can see, it was just 16% increase over the further 6 years. We absolutely did what we said we would do and would arrest the issues. But of course, that's not all that Peter May had to shout about in his time as the member. So let's have a look at the rest of Pete's record. And pointing again, the capital investment that he put in at the time as the Housing Cabinet member was just a mere 9 million. They may not have had as much money, you say. Well, actually, I've checked because I went through the book in detail. There was 31 million pounds worth in reserves available to be spent on council homes to make them better. And lo and behold, what else did he do? He sold off 2.7 million pounds worth of council homes, reducing the stock that we have available. And there's no wonder people are still looking for homes. But I'm pleased to say that we've started building homes. We've been renovating 400 million or so invested in housing since we took over. And of course, he didn't build a single house in the time that he was cabinet member. I know he couldn't, but anyway, I'm going to make the point. Moving on to repairs and maintenance. Again, capital investments, I'll turn it into English for those who aren't bilingual. It includes work such as a significant programme of upgrades in our schools, mechanical maintenance, electrical maintenance, building repairs, crematorium repairs to this building. We've also, as you know, in the last budget, took on responsibility for war memorials, and we're delivering on that pledge to invest and make sure our war memorials are maintained to the correct standard. And also we're progressing with our public toilet upgrades, including the ones in the marina, which I'm sure Councillor Bennett will welcome. We also made a commitment last year to roll out and upgrade every play area in the city. When you add that together with the work that we're doing to create the largest sporting complex on the east side of Swansea up at Bonny Mine, plus the investment in 3G pitches and other all-weather pitches, the investment is circa 20 million. That will include 2 million specifically for equipment for children who have mobility or disability issues. So again, play is accessible for everyone. That programme has now been planned over the next 2 years. So the commitment that every park and play area in Swansea will receive an upgrade that is council run. In terms of skate parks, as we said, we had an intention last year to upgrade and to bring new skate facilities. I can confirm that we will now deliver £1 million to develop 2 new strategic sites, and commend the work that colleagues in the Labour-run Mumbles Community Council have done, the foresight and vision they showed to deliver that fantastic facility on the seafront. We plan to replicate that with 2 further facilities strategically placed in the county, and we'll also commit to upgrading all 13 of the existing skate areas in our parks that exist at the present time. We were pleased to be successful in our levelling up bid. We only got 1 of the 3 bids, and we hope that the other bids will be successful in the next bidding round. £20 million off the UK government as part of the levelling up fund. We have to match that with £9 million because being UK government and being Tories, they won't give you money. You have to pay to get money. But it will deliver a fantastic scheme running from the Havard Copper Works all the way down the Strand, and of course allowing us to extend Swansea Museum so that more exhibits and exhibitions can be accessed by the public. We're also working with the Welsh Government, progressing the sea defences and new promenade in Mumbles. That's now confirmed in at 23.6 million. Works are about to begin. We've been working with the local members to make sure that they are aware of what's going on. And of course, we will take the opportunity to install all of the bay lighting that we promised last year so that the bay is lit and safe for everyone to use. Moving back into the city centre, obviously Castle Gardens is a beloved part of Swansea's history. We gave a commitment to, when we redid the square, to turn it back and to recapture the charm of Castle Gardens. That is now going out to tender, and we should be able to begin work towards the autumn on this. And again, delivering on the pledge we made, a 61% increase in green space is planned. New play fountains will be established for children to play in, 2 new retail units, new screens in the park, and also guarantee of event space so that people who want to demonstrate or wish to hold events there can do so. So Jeff, you missed your encore. So Jeff Councillor Jones, Councillor Jeff Jones always asks the question. He asked a good question again tonight, Mr. Smith, but he always tests us on, well, how can you afford this? How can you possibly do all of this money? So I thought I'd do a little bit of play your cards right or play your cash right for Councillor Jones. I was going to say, I was going to call you joyful, Jeff, but I went online and the only pictures I could find of you, Jeff, were those. You've got to learn to smile on the internet, I got to say. So anyway, we've got the Lib Dems and the Independents up there, and we've got Labour below. So the unsupported borrowing taken out by the Lib Dems and Independents was 67.3 million, 81 million in today's money. We've taken out 135 million. Jeff will go, ooh, that's a big amount. That's a lot. Why are you doing that? Well, the reason we can do it is because when you took it out at the rate you took it out, it cost you 5.7 million a year to repay, which would be 6.8 million in today's money. Ours is costing us 5.9 million because we took it out at 1.96%. There's no such thing as luck. And the overall average rate of the borrowing taken out by the Lib Dems and Independents was 5.51%. As Mr. Smith said, and he'll come to it in his later report, through the prudent work Mr. Smith and his team have done, and by doing the borrowing at the right time, our pool rate is now down to 3.55%. So we've borrowed more, we're paying less, and we've got more money to invest in the city of Swansea. And again, just to show, their budget wasn't small at the time. Ours is bigger now. So actually, when you compare the amount we've borrowed against the size of our overall budget, again, it is not excessive, and you've got to keep that in mind. These are not set limits, and as Mr. Smith made clear in his introduction, the £50 million he suggested may not be the actual figure. He will make that determination at a later time. But there is still extra investment to come. Now, for those of you who are eagle-eyed, the Economic Recovery Fund in last year's report was set at 20 million. We made the decision early in the year to suspend that because of the issues with the energy price spikes, and then when the Truss government came in and everything went haywire. So we put the £15 million aside for energy costs. That means there is still 5 million to be deployed. And therefore, we're proposing to use quite a bit of that 5 million this evening as additional announcements tonight. So we will continue with our free rides offer, and that will be free bus rides for everyone anywhere in Swansea. And that will continue for the next year. And we will also, because we know that the emergency COVID support provided by governments to bus operators is coming to an end, we will set aside £400,000 to help cushion local community bus services who would otherwise potentially be at risk of losing their bus service. In addition, our community centres play an immensely important role. They are not often run directly by the council, they're run by community groups. They will too be feeling the squeeze, and of course the Tory government in London hasn't helped them either. So we will provide 250,000 out of that energy fund to directly help our community centres deal with their energy bills. Levelling up, I don't like the term, especially as it's associated with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Sunak. And of course, Mr. Sunak's view of levelling up is sending money to his very wealthy constituency. This one will be levelling up based on money following need. So it will not be a fund that will just be spread anywhere. It will go to the areas of most need in the city. Peppa Pig. Boris spoke constantly about Peppa Pig. Did you not remember? He went to Peppa Pig land. I think everybody, regardless of their political affiliation, will be welcoming the investment that this council is making to do every play area. We all saw the benefit that has to children's play and children's development and well-being. There were a number of requests for new parks and play areas to be created. We've listened to that, and I'm pleased that we can announce a further £500,000 tonight to allow for the establishment of additional play areas in areas which currently have gaps. In addition to that, natural play and nature trails are becoming more and more popular. They are really good educational ways of getting children to play. So again, we're releasing £100,000 to help establish new nature trails and encourage natural play. We have had a backlog for some time of requests for disabled parking bays and for adaptations to corners of streets to allow people with mobility issues to get around more easily. So therefore, we're providing £135,000 to help reduce that backlog and to get some of those spaces delivered. We've also got a bin and bus shelter replacement programme. Many people will know already that many of the bus shelters and bins have been replaced. There's another 150,000 to do even more. And can I commend both Councillor Cyril Anderson and Councillor Andrew Stevens for the work they've been doing to make sure we do that. And we have an effective programme of delivery. And of course, the officers have been working really hard to actually physically do the works. Our roads, as you will know, we have faced the worst winter probably in a decade. We've used more salt and grit than we have in many years. And as a result, our roads will need extra investment. So as I said, we're investing 7 million, but we also wanted to ensure that the team that we put in place before the election to do those extra works is retained. So there's nearly £500,000 for additional resources to carry out more repairs more often. Likewise, the drainage issues from flooding and climate change. Yeah, I was going to say, Peter, you can thank me later. You can thank me later. Please point to it. Thank you very much. We'll get a picture later. But we were very pleased to be able to provide not only the community budgets at 1.125 million, so that Councillor Peter May could use part of his Labour provided community budget to do work in uplands, but also to send the team up there to unblock the uplands drains, so the uplands community. But of course, I believe we've done 2/3 of the drains across Swansea now as part of this extra work, and again, more seriously, that is helping to prevent lots of areas from flooding and providing families with to avoid disruption from those climate change impacts. We've got obviously the coronation celebrations this year. As we did in the Platinum Jubilee, following representations, we will waive the fees for road closures for people who want to arrange street parties and community events, and we will make some money available to allow that to happen free of charge. We are in the process of procuring and installing the new CCTV system for the city centre and also outlying areas. That also allows us to deliver free Wi-Fi into our outlying communities, as we've said. That delivery will continue. But we also wanted to ensure that where members are requesting moving of cameras, the new CCTV will allow us some flexibility in terms of moving domes around. And therefore, we're going to buy some further kit so that there will be more resources available should people need to call on them if they've got hotspots that need CCTV coverage. And then youth engagement. We know we've had some challenges in terms of the effect that the COVID pandemic has had on especially our young people and the tensions that has created in communities. So again, we're making available £100,000 today to support further youth engagement in communities to assist our young people. And then in terms of safeguarding jobs, very important point. Had we not been able to have the energy pot that we have inside the council, as I said, given that we didn't have any help, we would probably have been looking at in excess of 400 job losses this year. Through the work that we've done, working with our union colleagues, and I again commend Councillor David Hopkins for the work he's done in terms of taking our discussions through with unions. Ahead of the Christmas period, we were down to 61 posts at risk. We are now, through the rollbacks made at Cabinet last week and other changes that are being made, we believe that only 30 posts are now at risk. Some of those are vacant and others are people who are looking to access the early voluntary retirement scheme. And the aim will be, as it's been in previous years, for us to do all we can within the Central Council to avoid compulsory redundancies. Can't give an absolute guarantee, but we will do all we can. In terms of schools, obviously governing bodies will make their own determination. We cannot influence that. That is a governing body matter. Sorry, I'll just bring it up in Welsh for you so I can play. Onwards to risk. So one of the things that we do have to bear in mind is that whilst we're able to put lots of money in this year, and it's a point, as I made to Mr. Thraves in the response, there are still some big risks out there and some big things coming down the track. We don't know what the level of the National Pay Awards will be. We don't know whether we'll get money to fund those awards. There could be a very big bill handed to this authority, which we would have to try and fund. Future inflation, it is due to fall. That's the projection, but we don't know to what level, and we're probably likely to see still higher inflation than we've seen in decades for some time. Energy costs, yes, energy has started to fall again, but we cannot absolutely say that energy is now out of the way and it's not a big risk for next year. So that is one of the issues that we need to keep looking at constantly. Bus energy emergency support, as I said, the COVID support is dropping out. So we need to look at the impacts of that because passenger numbers, as you know, are still not back to pre-pandemic levels. Some grants are still unconfirmed, so there is a potential for changes in grants, which we may need to look at. And of course, we don't know what our future settlements will be. At the moment, the settlement, I think, is at 2% or 3% for next year. It will need to be significantly higher than that to avoid a big black hole. Nearly coming to the end now, folks. Yep, absolutely. Council tax comparison. So it is important because the pounds and pence situation is really important. We always look at the percentages and you can focus on that. It is a comparator. But actually, when you look at Swansea, we're average in terms of Wales. We're just a smidgen below the average. And of course, if you are comparing us to other local authorities, we compare pretty well. You will have seen a number of authorities setting council tax close to 10% this year. And as I said in my response earlier, we're not proposing to do that. So looking at council tax for this year, I'll just leave the Welsh up there for a second and then I'll go to the English. As I said, our internal council tax level is 3.95%. That's the money we're raising for services here. But because of the set of the fire levy, which, as I said, was 17% and outside of our control, we have to fund that. And that is going to cost us £2.2 million. That brings us a total of 5.95%. Council rents, as you will see in the documents, are due to go by up to 6.1%. That's the level set by the Minister. 70% of our tenants do not pay that rent themselves. It's paid for through benefits through UK government. Of the 30% that do, they pay something or all. So again, it's a gradual scale. So 70% of people will not pay that 6.1% increase. And as I said earlier, even at 5.95%, that costs us money every year for the next 3 or 4 years because you cannot recover that money in future years. As I said, 3.95% is 86p on a Band B bill. That's the weekly equivalent. And if you want to compare to the independent council over in MPT, they are £200 a year higher than us. So if you live just a couple of miles that way, your council tax bill is £200 a year more. And if you go west to Plaid in Carmarthen, they've just set their council tax at 6.8%. So I think we compare very, very well to our neighbours. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to say thank you very much for listening, and that's our budget.
Thank you. I'm now going to.
Is this for the whole budget now? Is it, because he's done everything, let's be fair.
Hang on, Chris. I got a process I got to follow.
If you carry on.
Just let me do that. You can come back in.
Oh.
Thank you. I'm just going to deal with each report individually. Okay, so I need to go back to Ben on the medium financial plan. Mr. Smith, you need to come back in, please. Hasn't gone home.
Haven't gone home, Chair. Yes, so I'll move on to, as you say, the officer advice on each report in turn. The first one is the medium-term financial plan. As I promised, I will be very brief on my advice on most of the reports. This one, I draw your attention to only a few matters, which is page 9. You have a single recommendation, which I will be looking for the leader and others to move in due course. I draw your attention to page 10 and section 1.3. It emphasises the MTFP is merely a planning assumption for the future. And as the leader and I have indicated, there are a whole raft of uncertainties as much as certainties. And then the only other bit I'm going to draw your attention to is page 16, which is the big table of all of the core assumptions. I am satisfied that they are all perfectly reasonable on the basis of what I know and what I don't know. But emphasising some of the matters I've already said, when you look at the future costs of pay awards for teachers and non-teachers, and I don't know any of them because I don't decide any of them. In fact, no one in this council decides any of them. The pressures are real and pronounced. I draw your attention to the one that marked note 5. There is a quadrennial revaluation of the teachers' pension fund due to hit in 24-25, and I have shared fully my concerns and worries with the School Budget Forum on that matter. We have seen large increases in the past, which have been ameliorated by specific grants to mitigate some of the pension cost increases. This may come to pass, it may not. That's for the Government Actuaries Department to determine. I specifically draw your attention to the 2 items marked note 8, and this is the item that I emphasise particularly around the novel and slightly contentious, but I'm satisfied because interest rates have gone up 10 times that it is right for me to sit on my hands and not borrow any more money in the short term. But I've drawn a line in the sand at the moment of £50 million worth of assumed capital borrowing. I am assuming that I can get that away at broadly the pool rate of 3.5%. That with a 2.5% MRP requires 6% of that 50 million to be funded. That's £3 million a year cumulatively in the revenue budget eventually. And as you can see, it is currently presumed to be drawn from the capital equalisation reserve. So that's £6 million ultimately being drawn out of the capital equalisation reserve, and I'm proposing to technically fund that from the item that Councillor Jones and I referred to previously, which is I anticipate £8 million being added into the CER by the end of this year. But for the avoidance of doubt, none of this is in the base budget yet, because I will be deferring borrowing until I think it is right and prudent to do so, to take advantage of lower base rates than they currently are. I would draw your attention to line 9 as well. You will note that there is a reduction in the contingency fund of £2.5 million by year 3 and 4. That would ordinarily be not deemed to be prudent by myself, but it is because when we see the revenue budget, you will see I'm adding £2 million in the early days. And so viewed over this life cycle of both the budget and the medium-term financial plan, I am satisfied that it's a sort of broadly neutral net draw. The leader has made reference to the Mid Wales Fire Authority, and there will be future pressures undoubtedly there. We do put some specific money in terms of demographics for social care. It's probably not enough, but it's a marker around what we can think we can afford with the forecast that we've got, and it will be reviewed every year. The council tax assumption right down at the bottom in terms of item 18, there is a stylised assumption of an average of 5%, and I always give advice that I expect it to be in the range of 3 to 7%. Those that were in the council chamber last year will recall that council tax was much lower than that, and there is an element of catch up in that in the current year's proposals, but also for the inflation pressures I've advised, and also the matters that the leader has drawn to your attention in terms of the Fire Authority levy. So whilst the amounts anticipated to be going in future years is materially lower in cash terms than the current year, it is predominantly as a result of the assumptions over future amounts of revenue support grant. I have assumed 3% for 24-25. The reason for that is the Welsh Government settlement says it's 3%, and therefore it is 3% until it's not 3%. And then I've gone for 2% in the final 2 years, which is consistent with last year's medium-term financial plan. I could have been a bit higher, I could have been a bit lower. If you believe the ONS and the Office for Budget Responsibility, the outlook is grimmer than that. But I think there is an expectation and an assumption by all leading think tanks, economists, etc., that the spending numbers for the public sector are likely to be revised upwards in cash terms. So that's why you've got those figures in the table. I go back to the recommendation, having indicated it is a set of planning assumptions, and I am satisfied that they are all reasonable based on the facts I know and the facts I don't know. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Mr. Smith, are there any technical questions, Mr. Smith? Okay, can I have a proposer and a seconder then, please?
Chair, can I
Speak first.
sorry, can I move the report? But in doing so, could I also take the opportunity to thank Mr. Smith and his team formally for the work that they've done on all of the budget documents, the support he's given me and Cabinet over the months in terms of preparing the budget. Can I also pay tribute to all of the other heads of service and directors and the chief executive, and especially my cabinet colleagues who all have worked extremely hard to ensure that we have a budget that we can be proud of today. So with that, Chair, I will move.
Can I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Move to the vote. Can I? Sorry. No. Okay. I'll move to the vote then, please. Is all in agreement? A show of hands, please. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, so that's carried. Okay, so we now move on to the revenue budget. I've got 3 budget amendments have been received, one from the Uplands Group, one from the Conservative Group, and one from the Lib Dem Group and the Independent Opposition Group. The process will be, I'm going to call on the 151 officer to give his technical presentation, and this will include a technical adjustment to the original revenue budget for 23-24. So can I call on Mr. Ben Smith, please?
Thank you, presiding member. And this is the report I will have to give the most technical advice on, I'm afraid, and then I will speed up on all of the other reports. And as you've indicated, there is a need for me to advise you of a technical adjustment. That is a consequence of a very late settlement from Welsh Government. Again, the final settlement was published Tuesday night, and there is a need to make an adjustment of £52,000 to the budget proposals. I will give you advice on that when we've worked through all amendments and worked out what remaining substantive motion is in front of you when it comes to the statutory council tax resolution. But my intention, given that it's moved by £52,000, is to give officer advice to add £52,000 to contingency, recognise the £52,000 in additional revenue support grant, and when it comes to the statutory resolution, neutralise it to the exact penny, which I believe is £51, which I believe is £51,913. But I will give advice on that in due course. It is a rounding error upon a rounding error upon a rounding error. It's in there because of a need to make a technical adjustment around fire. It has affected all authorities, and I'm afraid I don't have a time machine. I had to publish the papers beforehand, and my middle name is Prudence, so I made an assumption of about £450,000 better off in revenue support grant, albeit it needed to be handed over to the fire authority in their levy. It ended up being 52 grand better than that. So I'm always going to err on the side of caution. In terms of technical advice to draw your attention to the report, page 49, there will be the 2 recommendations, and the recommendations could stand as is if this ends up being the substantive report, subject to all the amendments to be debated. The technical adjustment will be effected through the statutory resolution. I will come back to right at the end. Page 50, section 1.6. This has already been touched upon this evening. £60 million plus going in. Yes, there are cuts, savings, adjustments, technical financing of 25 million, but it's still a net £35 million going in. Section 2.1. We start the year overspent on services because, as I've referenced, there's an element of deja vu. Big nominal increase in settlement last year, but inflation has gotten away with everyone. That is being managed by the authority as a whole. But I must remind you that you're already in an overspend position on services, and I'm having to take central action to neutralise those pressures. On page 51, section 3.1, it gives you the official guidance around, yes, we had a provisional settlement just before Christmas. The final settlement came out, as I say, Tuesday night. Frankly, other than the technical adjustment, no changes worth noting, rounding error upon a rounding error, and that's why there are very little changes proposed between the original report that went to Cabinet in December, went again earlier in February, and is coming before you now today. 3.3 on page 51 indicates that it is solely a result of that fire service late grant transfer. Section 3.4 draws your attention to the observation that there is no formal requirement for protection or funding guarantee for either social services or schools, but it is clear from the wording in the Minister's letter and subsequent chatter and correspondence that there is a clear expectation specifically around schools. And a clear need to put money in, particularly into social services. And you see that in terms of the shape of where the cash money is going predominantly into budgets. So I draw your attention to that matter. If I draw your attention next to page 53 and the first big table, table 1A, the first one that I want to draw attention to is increase in pension costs, naught. Never had that before in our life. I am immensely proud of the work done by my pension fund staff, who have managed to result in a pension fund 100% funded for the first time in forever in this council's history, and that removes an enormous part of the pressures that we normally face. So I couldn't be prouder. The rest of the table indicates £60 million plus going in, the 25 million, it ebbs and flows a little bit up and down coming out, and the net overall increase. So that takes you to page 53 in terms of technical advice. I jump on to page 56. Table 1C, the impact on schools' budgets. There is a net £10 million going into schools' core. There, yes, is an expectation that schools will need to make a contribution to savings, as will every other part of the council. But in addition to that, there is the money in the central inflation provision, and schools have been indicated that they can access up to £6 million worth of that. And the leader referenced that in his slides overall as to the amounts available to schools. The minister's letter indicated an expectation of £117 million going into schools pan Wales, of which £107 million was in the settlement. Like for like, that meant we should be putting 7, 8, 9 million tops into schools. £10 million plus £6 million worth of energy costs means we have comfortably exceeded that ministerial expectation. And I've explained that fully to schools and Schools Budget Forum. Mustn't be misunderstood. There are still pressures in the system for schools, as there is everywhere. Schools are just one part of the council, an important part and independent minded, and they've got their own budgets to set individually, but there is not enough cake batter, going back to my analogy earlier, to fund absolutely everything. Section 4.19 advises that the capital financing charges have been increased specifically for the Mumbles Coastal Risk Management Programme because it's an additional top-up in revenue support grant. 3 authorities currently get a top-up. We get the largest top-up of any council as a result of that scheme, as a result of the successful bid and negotiations that I undertook on the council's behalf with the Welsh Government. Section 4.21, we've touched upon it before. It's an understatement by me there. The current market and inflationary market environment makes it very difficult and challenging for me to borrow, and that is the reason why I gave the advice I did on the medium-term financial plan. I want to sit on my hands for as long as possible. I draw your attention to section 4.24 to 4.26, the various levies. The leader has made significant reference to the Fire Authority levy. There are 3 levying bodies. They've all got unlimited levying powers, and it does eat into any cake batter that's left once we've worked out how much we've got. They have first dibs on the larder, and I will be careful what I say because those bodies are independent and they need to ask for what they need to ask for. But I can work out, if I do a Goldilocks analogy, I can see which one's gone for a small amount of porridge, which has gone for a large amount of porridge, and one which has gone for the middle road around broadly matching and maintaining its core spending power. I will say nothing else because I might drift into politics, but I have had to manage all of those figures, and the leader has made the point on the biggest user of our spending power, as it were, in terms of levies. So that's an important one to note, completely out of our control. Draw your attention to page 59 and table 2. Yes, there is £24.839 million worth of savings. Many of them are technical ones engineered by myself and my pension colleagues, but there is a requirement, just to re-emphasise what I've said, for schools to make a contribution. It's not an easy budget. Section 6.5 on page 60 reminds of the changes that Cabinet made in February, and those are reflected in the table and worked through the tables. Section 7.1 and table 3, it's a movable feast on the staffing numbers. Look, in the context of 12,000 staff in the council, including schools, it's a remarkably low number. I emphasise what I've said previously and the leader said previously. If we didn't use our reserves and firepower on the energy costs and other things, that would have been materially higher. The leader's slides is already updated for the latest intelligence, and that's why he quoted a lower number, and I'm quite comfortable with the figures that he has quoted. It is a movable feast and it's a low number. It's never a pleasant number, but it is a low number. Section 8.3 on page 63, it is my personal duty to determine whether I believe the reserves are adequate. For the avoidance of doubt, general reserves continue to remain at the absolute minimum safe level. 10 million in general reserves, the final jam jar to break in case of emergency, would last this council less than a week. So there is a reason why 10 million in isolation may sound big, but I say it's a very, very small number. And if you look at other authorities, we have one of the lowest general reserves. We do, on the corollary, have very high earmarked reserves, and that's one of the reasons why I'm able to give that advice. Page 64 and section 8.7. I do have to advise that longer term, as earmarked reserves are going to be drawn down, I've referenced up to £110 million worth of drawing down. And as the budgets continue to increase, it is not credible to keep general reserves at £10 million for forever. But we are in a cost of living crisis, and I am happy that at the moment they are adequate. But I will be giving advice in future years that they will at some point have to increase. It won't be a pleasant choice, but it will be officer advice I give at the relevant time. Section 8.8 indicates that we hold a contingency fund, a combination of in-year and normally on balance sheet money. Because of the pressures in the current 22-23 year, the contingency fund has nothing in it. It's all been committed. And that's why there is advice to be topping up the contingency fund because the pressures are not abating. It has currently got nothing in it come end of year. Section 8.10 re-emphasises that point, and you'll see in there a reference to £2 million being added to contingency. Contrast that with the £2 million that's coming out in the latter years of the medium-term financial plan. I am satisfied that therefore overall it is a score draw, and that is why I'm able to give advice for both the MTFP and the revenue budget that both are correct, adequate and prudent, and I've given that advice accordingly. Page 66, section 8.18. This is my personal duty to overall decide whether I believe that the budget as proposed is prudent. For the avoidance of doubt, I'm saying there it is. Section 9 sets out the assumptions on the budget requirement and council tax and inexorably drives the advice in terms of that 5.95% increase. And as I've said, I will, once we've worked through all of the amendments, give advice as to what the substantive motion is, and then ultimately what the figure is for the statutory resolution, which must be gotten right to the pence, whilst we're talking about the big numbers here. So two more items. Bottom of page 67, that was the reference that it was all provisional. It's now all final. And as I've said, I will wash the technical adjustment of the £52,000 through with your forbearance when we've completed all matters here and moved on to the statutory resolution. Final bit of technical advice before I finish. Bottom of page 69. I started with an assumption 6 months ago that our energy prices might spike by 15 million. We've now bought over 90% of our energy for the coming year, and it looks certain it's more like 12 million. And therefore, I believe there is up to £3 million worth of headroom available. But again, for the avoidance of doubt, that is not base budget. It was temporarily financed from reserves to avoid you having, as a council, to make cuts. So whilst the saving there is beneficial, it's a one-off saving that is available to fund one-off proposals. It is not available for base funding because it's not in the base budget. At that point, I will revert back to the chamber and remind that there are the two recommendations before you on this substantive motion. That completes my technical advice on the original set of proposals. Thank you, presiding member.
I've got a couple of speakers. Do you want to come in first, Leader?
Just formally to move the report, Chair.
Yeah, I got two speakers first. Councillor Rice.
I've got a number of technical questions, Chair, for...
Thank you. Sorry.
I've got a number of technical questions for the Section 151 officer. The first one, you just mentioned, Ben, on page 69, that at the bottom there, you'll see in Section E, the energy price inflation. Just for the avoidance of doubt, that means that there's potentially up to £3 million available for in-year spending rather than base spending. Number two, my next question is on the acceptable range for council tax as first outlined in the advice to the Cabinet, and again now for the medium-term financial plan, is between 3 and 7%. And I understand that the original advice, which was amended by the Cabinet on the day, was to set council tax at 4.95%. Just could confirm in terms of energy prices, am I right to think that when the assumptions on inflation for energy prices were set, they were set when natural gas prices were at $9.60 firm as of last night, they're at $2.80 a firm. And the next question, sorry for all of these ones, the next question would be, in terms of compound interest, if we were to reduce the proposed council tax increase from 5.95 back to the original 4.95, the compound impact in a year with an average of 5% for council tax going forward would only be about £67,000. And the final two questions I've got here is, do we have substantially more usable reserves than Cardiff at the current moment? Because my last assessment, what I've seen of the reserves which were published by the Welsh Government, was that Cardiff had 95.1 million usable reserves, and Swansea at the same period had 123.7 million in usable reserves. The final question is probably a question both for the Section 151 officer and for the legal officer, monitoring officer, is that even though we'd probably welcome many of the announcements by the leader today, are they not a material change to the budget which would need to be considered and to be published in advance?
So if I may come back in, presiding member, I will endeavour to answer what I believe are the 7 sets of questions. I will more than happy be corrected if I miss any for Councillor Rice. Yes, on the energy one, on question 1, there is £3 million worth of headroom as of my presumption today in terms of the money that was £15 million to be diverted from ERF. It's still in the Economic Recovery Fund. That was a reserve that was set up. It's being deployed to cover energy costs one-off as a procedural device for a number of years. It's not base funded, so it's one-off money. But at this point in time, my advice is there is £3 million worth of one-off headroom in there. In terms of the planning assumptions, the MTFP, I do like consistency. My third middle name is consistency, to go with prudence as the middle one. The range does tend to be 3 to 7, and there's a reason for that in terms of the relative wiggle room. Yes, the original advice was 4.95% in terms of as acceptable, but Cabinet made £1 million, effectively made £901,000 worth of changes on the day. And when you change council tax, you've also got to expense the 18% in CTRS, Council Tax Reduction Scheme. So effectively, Cabinet asked my permission. They make the decisions, but they asked my permission. Was I satisfied that putting £1 million in could be offset by £1 million coming out? And that's the reason why I gave officer advice that the range should be upped, and Cabinet decided to increase it by 1%, so that effectively £1 million went in, 200 and something thousand went in for Council Tax Reduction Scheme, and that funded the proposed and passed recommendations, which are fully reflected in this report. Councillor Rice quite rightly reflects that effectively at spot market rates, yes, energy costs on gas are 70% down. Someone would say, well, why didn't you wait and just buy it all in the energy spot market? Well, you can't have it both ways, is my view. We buy a year in advance on a rolling monthly contract through the Crown Commercial Services, and avoided almost no increases at all last year. It does mean it's locked in the current year. You win some, you lose some. Very much like the domestic households, at the same point the wholesale costs are down 70%, households are facing a 20% increase in their headline rate of energy bills come April, and a 41% increase when you factor in the loss of the welcome but ending Treasury support for the sort of £400 national energy rebate. So the figures, yes, I recognise them, but we are where we are. We avoided 300% increases last year. The pain comes this year. I do expect future buying to result in further reductions in the pressures, and that does reassure me I make the right officer advice and the right decisions are being taken to only temporarily fund from reserves rather than force hardwired budget savings in a year. The compounding effect you referenced on council tax is an interesting one. I think I know what you mean in terms of the compounding effect of the relative difference could be argued to be £67,000. But for the avoidance of doubt, not putting 1% in council tax avoids £1 million of base income each year, and there's no way of catching that up. So I agree, but fundamentally disagree with the figure, because you're £1 million light if you hadn't, if council went for the lower figure now today or had gone lower at cabinet. I wouldn't have allowed it to cabinet. I would have given officer advice that said it was not prudent enough. That's why cabinet took my advice. I hope council does again today. But I think I know what you mean in terms of the marginal. It's just on that compounding element of the differential of the 1% building on each of the other ones. But I think 67k is a little bit undercooking it, and you've got to recognise as a council you're giving up £1 million in the base for life. If you need to catch that up, you've got to put £1 million straight back onto council tax the following year. So I don't entirely agree with that one. I have number 6. I'm looking at my own scribbled notes. Apologies. Do we have more reserves than Cardiff? Yes. Simple answer. Yes. Do we have at the moment more specific reserves than most other councils in Wales? Also yes. But we are one of the biggest in Wales. I do accept Cardiff is bigger still, but there are others with bigger reserves and others who are got proportionately bigger reserves again. But for the avoidance of doubt, I have given officer advice that says I'm expecting to deploy £60 million of revenue reserves over 2 years and a further 50 of capital. So whilst they're big at the moment, they're already anticipated to be well and truly mostly spent and are at the level, in the advice I've given to Councillor Jones earlier, at the level that I'm comfortable with. And I will soon start to get very uncomfortable with. Your final question is an interesting one, and I will answer. This is part of the constitutional ping pong, isn't it? You're making council decisions today. Once a budget is set, a budget is set. Moving into the new year, spending decisions are a function of the executive and cabinet. So the leaders' slides and the new announcements are not, in my view, formal amendments to the budget, because if there were amendments to the budget, you're quite right, Councillor Rice, they would need to have been made clear in advance. But given there is £3 million worth of headroom in the energy fund, which is itself drawn from the economic recovery fund, and there are further amounts still not spent in the economic recovery fund, my tally up very quickly, because they are political slides, they're not my slides, but I recognise many of the numbers in there. And from my tallying up, it came to less than was in the headroom in the energy fund and less than was left in the economic recovery fund. So the administration as cabinet could deploy those spare amounts of reserves in the coming year. I would add one cautionary tale, and I will give the same advice to the executive, which is they may be desired to do and clearly would be drawn from reserves if they were all done. Those reserves may be needed for another purpose. Inflation could take off, pay bills could be higher, and so I may need to give advice to the executive in year that whilst they're all nice to do, there may be other things that compete and are even more pressing in the short term. So that's the reason why you may feel there's a bit of a disconnect, Councillor Rice, between the two, but I think there are two different things. They are not amendments or changes to the budget. It was the leader setting out his intention for the administration and things they might decide to do as a cabinet and an executive, but I will always stand by to give firm and forthright advice as to the prudence of that in year if other stuff turns up that requires cabinet to listen to my advice and potentially take other courses of action in year. I think I've captured all 7 questions. My apologies if I've missed any, Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Peter Black, please.
Thank you, Chair. I only have one question. In terms of the collection rates, obviously because of the impact of the cost of living on the amount of money we're able to collect physically, and that's all the evidence in the rising rent arrears, we have reduced the collection rate, I think, is it to 92%. Could you say what the cost of that is to the council, and what is this equivalent in terms of council tax, please?
Certainly, if I come in again, presiding member. So the collection rate has been reduced by 2 percentage points as a result of the advice I gave to council in November. It has been reduced to 94.5%, I think, from 96.5%. So it's at 94.5, not 92. But the point is well made by Councillor Black. It has been reduced by 2%. In its simplest terms, if you reduce the collection rate by 2% to achieve any amount of council tax income yield, you've got to put council tax up by 2%. So the reality is 2% of the proposed 5.95% increase is effectively paying for the loss in the yield. But I do agree with Councillor Black, and he asked me the similar questions at scrutiny and elsewhere. The reality is I've taken a view as to what is prudent. This authority, I've reported 3 years on the trot, has had a £2 million shortfall in collections of council tax. We have been assisted for 2 years by the Welsh Government in that with a one-off scheme to compensate for people struggling to pay their bills. That ends. So I gave prudent advice in November, and all council listened to that advice and agreed to that 2% reduction. It's probably one of the harder decisions you've already made. You have got to make lots of tough choices, and by making that tough choice, you have made it harder for yourselves and have to go with a higher rate of council tax. But I do believe you have been prudent. Other authorities are at a higher rate. Some have chosen to increase the collection rate. I don't criticise other authorities, I don't criticise other colleagues, but my view is it is the right and prudent thing to have done to recognise that people will increasingly struggle to pay all of their bills. That's the reality of what's faced, and they will make value choices as to which one they pay first. And we will struggle to collect all of our council tax, as we always do. It is a fine, difficult judgment call, isn't it? Because anything I don't collect falls on everyone else. And I have a number of roles. I am your advisor on all financial matters. I have been the giver out of hundreds of millions of pounds worth of UK and Welsh government reliefs. But I am also the tax collector, and if I don't collect the taxes that are due, all of your public services will grind to a halt. And trying to get the balance right is probably one of the hardest tasks a Section 151 officer has. It's a pretty unique position in public sector where effectively you've got reserve powers to almost tell council what to do, albeit recognising that ultimately council makes the decision. And I do feel in the round you have taken and listened to my advice and been suitably prudent and cognizant of the real risks that there are. So I do recognise everything that Councillor Black has said. I know it's a long answer, but it's an important one. I've given that answer before, but I think it's an important one that all council members understand, and viewers and anyone who happens to read, you know, the results of this council decision when we get to it, understand why you've had to do what you've had to do. Thank you, presiding member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Right, for the benefit of doubt, are you still happy to propose and second the revenue, please, Councillor Stewart?
Yes, absolutely, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, it's 7 o'clock. We're going to have a break at the minute, right? You've all read the amendments. They're all in front of you, and I'll deal with the amendments when we come back, if that's okay. So you've got 10 minutes. There will be some refreshments in the foyer. They will turn up from the Labour group room, I believe.
Chair, just
Okay.
before we break, can I just thank you personally for the work you've done tonight to provide some refreshments for everybody. Jan has made all the sandwiches and everything outside for everybody, so I think we should thank her personally for what she's done.